The betrayal didn't come in the form of lipstick on his collar or a late-night phone call. It came through an Instagram notification. Lauren Peterson has tagged James Chen in a photo. Sarah's thumb hovered over the notification, her gut screaming at her not to click. The photo showed James and his ex sharing dinner at the new French restaurant he had told Sarah was too pretentious to try. The date stamp revealed it was taken the same night he had claimed to be working late. One click led to another, and soon Sarah uncovered months of secret meetings, hidden comments, and subtle interactions that painted a picture she couldn't unsee. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through Lauren's profile. Each photo felt like a knife twist. James and Lauren at a rooftop bar in Manhattan, their shoulders touching in a way that spoke of intimate familiarity. A coffee shop selfie where his smile, that genuine, crinkly-eyed smile she hadn't seen in months, lit up his whole face. Comments from Lauren on his work posts, inside jokes wrapped in seemingly innocent words that now carried the weight of deception. Sarah's mind raced back to all the business trips James had taken in the past year. Seattle, Chicago, New York. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with desperate purpose as she logged into their shared cloud storage, the one James had probably forgotten she had access to. There, in his travel folder, were the receipts that told the real story. Dinner for two at romantic restaurants, theater tickets, hotel reservations with king-size beds. The timeline emerged like a tragedy written in digital breadcrumbs. 8 months ago, James had attended a tech conference in New York, where Lauren worked as a UX designer. A casual coffee to catch up had turned into dinner, then drinks then. Sarah's stomach lurched as she found a series of Uber receipts from Lauren's address to various hotels, all charged to James's corporate card. With growing horror, Sarah realized how methodically James had covered his tracks. He had created a separate email account for corresponding with Lauren, but had slipped up by logging into it once on their shared laptop. The browser history revealed countless messages, each one more intimate than the last. "I can't stop thinking about you," Lauren had written. "What we had, what we could have again." James's replies were worse. "You're the one that got away. These past 5 years, I've been trying to recreate what we had, but nothing compares. Sarah's great, but she's not you." 5 years. Her entire relationship had been a replacement goldfish, a consolation prize, while James nursed his torch for Lauren. Sarah thought about all the times she had tried to deepen their connection, all the gentle hints about marriage, all the dreams she had shared. Had he been thinking of Lauren during those conversations? Had he been comparing them, finding Sarah wanting? The final piece fell into place when Sarah found a saved draft in James's personal email. It was a letter to Lauren, dated just 3 weeks ago. "I've been a coward, staying with Sarah, because it was safe, because she was there when you weren't. But seeing you again these past months has awakened everything I tried to bury. I'm going to end things with her. I just need time to figure out how to do it without hurting her too much." Sarah sat back in her chair, feeling oddly calmed despite the hurricane in her chest. The irony wasn't lost on her. James was trying to find a way to end things without hurting her too much, while actively betraying her in the worst possible way. She thought about the James who had danced with her in the rain, who had promised adventures and forever. Had that person ever really existed? Or had he always been a reflection of what Sarah wanted to see, while his heart belonged to a ghost from his past? As the afternoon sun cast shadows across their apartment, the home they had built together, filled with photos of their shared lives, Sarah felt something inside her shift. The pain was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else: clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally see the truth you've been trying not to acknowledge for months. James's number flashed across her screen at midnight, exactly 3 months after their split. Sarah had just finished a painting class, something she'd always wanted to try, but never did when she was with him. Her hands were still stained with blues and purples when she answered. His voice cracked as he spoke, telling her that Lauren had chosen someone else, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Then came the words she had once dreamed of hearing. "You should have been my wife. You were always meant to be my wife." Sarah looked at her paint-stained hands, realizing how much more colorful her life had become without him. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago, those words would have been everything she wanted to hear. Now they felt like expired medicine, useless and potentially toxic. Through the phone, she could hear the familiar sounds of their old neighborhood. He was probably sitting on that bench near the coffee shop where they first met. "Are you drunk, James?" she asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. There was a certain slur to his words that she recognized from countless office parties and wedding receptions. "No, yes. Maybe a little," he admitted. "But that doesn't make this any less true. Lauren, she's getting married, Sarah. To her college boyfriend. She was just using me to make him jealous, to get him to commit." He laughed bitterly. "Calm as a bitch, right?" Sarah sat down on her paint-splattered stool, acrylic still drying on her latest creation, an abstract piece her art teacher had praised for its raw emotional honesty. The canvas was filled with stormy blues and violent purples, colors that somehow captured the turbulence of the past 3 months better than words ever could. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, running her fingers over a particularly bold brushstroke. "Because I've been an idiot." James's voice cracked again. "I threw away the best thing in my life for a fantasy. You were real, Sarah. What we had was real. I see that now. The way you loved me. No one has ever loved me like that." 3 months ago, Sarah would have melted at these words. She would have rushed to comfort him, to reassure him, to try to fix whatever was broken. But now, listening to him stumble through his confession, she felt something entirely different. Pity. "Do you remember that night in the rain?" he continued, his words becoming more desperate. "When our car broke down and we danced? That was real love, wasn't it? We can have that again. I'll do it right this time. I'll give you everything you wanted. The ring, the wedding, the house with the herb garden you always talked about." Sarah's eyes drifted to her painting. In the center, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a tiny figure dancing in the storm. She'd painted it without thinking, a memory transformed into art. "You know what's funny, James?" She interrupted his rambling. "I'm taking this amazing art class now, every Tuesday and Thursday night, the same nights you used to work late. Turns out, I'm pretty good at it. My teacher says I have a natural eye for color." "Sarah, And last weekend, I went skydiving. Remember how you always said it was too dangerous? Well, it was terrifying and amazing, and I've never felt more alive." She dipped her fingers in a blob of wet paint on her palette, watching it stain her skin. "The thing is, James, I'm not the same person who danced with you in the rain. That girl. She would have given anything to hear you call her your wife. But I'm not her anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Sarah could picture him on that bench, probably wearing that great hoodie he always threw on when he was feeling low, his hair a mess from running his fingers through it too many times. "The woman you want to make your wife doesn't exist anymore," she continued softly. "She faded away a little bit every time you chose Lauren over her, every time you made her feel like she wasn't enough. And the woman I am now, she doesn't want to be your wife. She's too busy becoming herself." The hardest part wasn't packing 5 years of her life into boxes. It was packing 5 years of dreams that would never come true. Sarah found herself sitting on her sister's floor at 3 a.m., surrounded by photos, ticket stubs, and small mementos that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. Each item told a different story. The movie tickets from their first date, the seashell from their beach vacation, the handwritten note promising forever and always. Her sister found her there, methodically sorting memories into 2 piles, things to burn and lessons learned. Emma didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside Sarah, wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders, and started helping her sort through the debris of a shattered relationship. They came across a photo booth strip from a carnival 3 years ago, 4 shots of Sarah and James making silly faces, looking impossibly young and in love. Sarah's hands trembled as she held it. "He was smiling in this one," she whispered, tracing James's face with her fingertip. "I remember thinking how lucky I was to have someone who could make me laugh like that." Now I wondered if he was thinking of her even then. The night crept on as they excavated more memories. A drawer full of birthday cards, a collection of pressed flowers from their walks in the park, The carefully preserved receipt from their first fancy dinner date, where James had insisted on treating her despite being between jobs. Sarah had kept everything, building an archive of their love story. Now each item felt like a witness to her naivety. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling out a notebook. Inside were sketches she'd made of their future home, complete with a reading nook and a garden for growing herbs. "I had our whole life planned out, Emma, down to the color of the kitchen cabinets." Her voice cracked. How stupid was I? Emma grabbed her sister's hands, forcing Sarah to look at her. "You weren't stupid. You were in love. There's a difference." But Sarah couldn't stop the flood of memories. The way James would bring her coffee in bed every Sunday morning. The silly dance moves he'd invented just to make her smile. The quiet moments when they'd lay together, planning adventures they'd never take. Had any of it been real, or had she been living in a fantasy while James yearned for someone else? Around 4 a.m., they found the engagement ring catalog Sarah had saved on her laptop. She'd bookmarked several pages, hoping James would somehow see them, take the hint. Now, looking at the glittering diamonds on the screen, she felt a different kind of pain. Not the sharp stab of betrayal, but the dull ache of time wasted. "I kept waiting," Sarah admitted, closing the laptop. "Every birthday, every anniversary, every vacation. I thought, this is it. This is when he'll ask." I didn't want to pressure him, didn't want to be that girlfriend who demands a ring. So I waited, and now I know why he never asked. Emma pulled her sister close as fresh tears fell. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up, early morning traffic, birds greeting the dawn. The world spinning on despite Sarah's personal earthquake. The things to burn pile had grown considerably larger than the lessons learned pile. "You know what hurts the most?" Sarah asked, fingering the edge of an old Valentine's Day card. "It's not just losing him. It's losing the person I was with him. The girl who believed in forever, who thought love was enough, who trusted so easily." She tossed the card into the burn pile. "I don't know how to be her anymore." Emma squeezed her sister's hand. "Maybe you're not supposed to be her anymore. Maybe this is your chance to be someone stronger." Sarah looked around at the physical evidence of her unraveled life. The boxes, the piles, the memories scattered like autumn leaves. In the pale light of dawn, she realized that the hardest goodbyes weren't to the people who left, but to the dreams you had to let die with them. Sarah Martinez still remembered the exact moment she fell in love with James Chen. It wasn't during their first kiss or even their first date. It was during a thunderstorm when their car broke down miles from home. Instead of panicking, James turned up the radio, pulled out emergency snacks from his backpack, and turned their misfortune into an impromptu dance party while waiting for roadside assistance. "This is why we'll make it," he had said, twirling her in the rain. "We can make anything fun together." That night, Sarah believed she had found her forever person. Their story had begun 3 months earlier, in the bustling coffee shop where Sarah worked part-time while pursuing her master's degree. James wasn't like her usual customers who rushed in and out with their lattes. He lingered, typing away on his laptop, occasionally catching her eye with a warm smile that made her forget drink orders. It took him 2 weeks to finally ask for more than just coffee. "I've tried every drink on your menu," he had said, leaning against the counter one quiet afternoon. "I think it's time I tried dinner instead." His confidence was charming, but it was the slight tremor in his hands as he handed her his phone number that made her heart flutter. That tiny show of nervousness beneath his composed exterior told her he was real. Their first date was a disaster by conventional standards. The trendy restaurant James had chosen lost their reservation, and the backup pizza place had a line wrapping around the block. They ended up at a hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese restaurant, sitting on plastic stools and slurping pho while watching street performers through the foggy window. Sarah learned that James had grown up in San Francisco with traditional Chinese parents who wanted him to become a doctor, but he had chosen software engineering instead. He spoke about his family with such tenderness that Sarah found herself sharing things she rarely told anyone, about her father's death when she was 12, about raising her younger sister while their mother worked double shifts, about her dreams of opening an art therapy studio someday. "You're different," James had said, walking her home that night. Most people talk about their struggles like they're apologizing for them. You talk about yours like they're the ingredients that made you stronger. He kissed her beneath a flickering streetlight, tasting of mint and possibility. The following months unfolded like scenes from a movie Sarah had always wanted to star in. James introduced her to his world of tech meetups and coding challenges, while she drew him into her universe of gallery openings and poetry slams. They discovered they both loved old kung fu movies, could spend hours in bookstores, and shared an irrational fear of butterflies. Their differences complemented each other perfectly. She helped him slow down and appreciate art, while he taught her the beauty of algorithms and planning. Then came that fateful stormy night. 6 months into their relationship, they were driving back from a weekend trip to wine country when their car gave out on a deserted stretch of highway. Most men would have been frustrated, maybe even angry. But James, he turned potential disaster into magic. As thunder rolled overhead and rain pelted the windows, he reached into his seemingly bottomless backpack, the one Sarah always teased him about carrying everywhere. Out came a package of Oreos, 2 juice boxes, and a tiny portable speaker. The sounds of their favorite song, Perfect by Ed Sheeran, filled the car as James pulled her into the rain. "Dance with me," he said, water streaming down his face. "Life's going to throw us lots of broken down cars and stormy nights, but as long as we're together, we'll always find a reason to dance." They swayed in the headlights of their stranded car, soaked to the bone, but laughing like children. That was the moment. Not because of the grand gesture or the romantic words, but because of the promise she saw in his eyes, the promise of a future where challenges would become adventures, where hard times would be weathered together, where love would always find a way to dance in the rain. Sarah didn't know then that promises, like rain, could slip through your fingers. She didn't know that the same man who danced with her in a storm would one day become the hurricane that would tear her world apart. Sarah didn't throw his clothes out the window or set his belongings on fire. Instead, she prepared his favorite dinner, the same meal she had cooked on their first anniversary. As James walked in, the familiar aroma hit him before the sight of Sarah sitting at their dining table, his phone propped against his wineglass, displaying the incriminating messages and photos. "I thought we could have one last meal together," she said calmly, "while you explain to me how long you've been living 2 lives." The color drained from his face as he realized there would be no talking his way out of this one. His briefcase hit the floor with a dull thud. Sarah had arranged everything perfectly. The Korean braised short ribs he loved, the expensive wine they'd been saving for a special occasion, and between them, his secrets laid bare on the table like unwanted garnish. The steam from the food rose into the air, carrying with it the weight of 5 years' worth of memories, now tainted. "Sarah, James started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Sit down, James. You owe me at least this much." Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had rehearsed this moment all afternoon, determined not to let him see her break. "The food will get cold." He sank into his chair, his eyes darting between the phone displaying his messages to Lauren and Sarah's unnervingly calm face. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, neither willing to make the first move. Finally, Sarah picked up her chopsticks and began serving him, a gesture so painfully domestic it made his hands tremble. "When did it start?" she asked, pouring wine into his glass with the same care she'd shown at countless dinner parties. "Was it really the New York conference, or had you been waiting for an opportunity all along?" James stared at the food, his appetite clearly gone. "It wasn't planned," he whispered. "Seeing her again, it brought back everything I thought I'd moved past." "Everything you thought you'd moved past," Sarah repeated, her chopsticks clicking against the plate with precise control. "While building a life with me, while letting me believe we had a future, while watching me wait for a proposal that was never going to come, you were just, what? Killing time." The truth spilled out of James like water from a broken dam. Yes, he had loved Sarah, in his way. But Lauren had been his first real love, the one who got away. Their reunion had awakened feelings he buried, made him question everything. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. Sarah laughed, a sound so bitter it made them both flinch. You never meant to hurt me. Then explain this. She reached into her bag and pulled out printed copies of his hotel receipts, his secret email exchanges, his carefully crafted lies about business trips. You created a whole separate email account, James. You planned meetups in different cities. You wrote her that I was great, but not her. Tell me, what part of that wasn't meant to hurt me? James's face crumpled. I was going to tell you. When? After how many more secret meetings? After how many more nights of me waiting up, believing you were working late? Sarah's composure finally cracked, her voice rising. Or were you waiting for Lauren to make up her mind about whether she wanted you back before deciding if you should keep me as your backup plan? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside their apartment, life continued. Cars honked, people laughed, the world spun on. But in their dining room, time seemed frozen in a tableau of betrayal. Two people who had once promised each other forever, now strangers across a table of cooling food and spilled dreams. The worst part, Sarah said, finally letting tears fall, isn't even the affair. It's that you let me spend 5 years loving you, knowing you were settling. You watched me plan our future while holding on to your past. You made me feel crazy for wanting more, where the truth was, you were never going to give it to me because your heart was already taken. At their friend's wedding reception, Sarah caught her reflection in a champagne glass, the forced smile of a woman who had mastered the art of hiding disappointment. While their friends flaunted engagement rings and wedding bands, she had become an expert at deflecting questions about her own future. That evening, she overheard James telling his cousin, "Marriage is just a piece of paper." The same James who had once planned their wedding menu during their second year together now couldn't even say the word marriage without flinching. She downed her champagne and excused herself to the bathroom, where she spent 10 minutes practicing her "I'm fine" face. The wedding belonged to Mike and Jenny, college sweethearts who had started dating 6 months after Sarah and James. Sarah remembered double dating with them, planning couples trips, and staying up late discussing their future weddings. Now, watching Jenny radiate joy in her white dress, Sarah felt the weight of time slipping through her fingers like sand. "You'll be next," Jenny had squealed earlier, hugging Sarah during the bouquet toss. Sarah had deliberately stepped back, letting other girls scramble for the flowers. James, chatting with groomsmen across the room, hadn't even noticed. 5 years ago, he would have been by her side, whispering jokes about wedding traditions in her ear. Now the distance between them at social events had become as familiar as it was painful. The changes had been subtle at first, like shadows lengthening before sunset. James started working later, claiming his startup needed more attention. Their date nights, once sacred, became casual takeout on the couch. When Sarah brought up their future, James would kiss her forehead and say, "We're good as we are, aren't we?" Each time, she swallowed her dreams along with her protests. Later that night, during the father-daughter dance, Sarah had escaped to the venue's garden. The fairy lights strung through the trees reminded her of another wedding they'd attended 2 years ago. That night, James had pulled her behind a rose bush, tipsy on champagne and love. "When we get married," he had whispered, "I want lanterns everywhere. Hundreds of them, floating up into the sky with our wishes." Now she wondered if those dreams had floated away with imaginary lanterns, becoming as distant as stars. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, "Emma, how are you holding up?" Sarah stared at the message, remembering their conversation from last week. Emma had noticed the signs before Sarah had admitted them to herself. The way James changed the subject whenever Sarah mentioned their future. How he'd stopped including her in his 5-year plans. The separate vacations he'd begun taking for work conferences. The garden door creaked open, and Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. It was James's mother, Helen, who had always treated Sarah like a daughter. "Beautiful wedding,